Welcome to True Crime Cases. Today, we are unveiling a shocking story of jealousy of mechanic Robert, age 55, who was highly esteemed and revered. In his close-knit Brooklyn neighborhood, Robert was regarded as a kind family man, devoted more than 30 years to, with Amira, his wife, who supported his through adversity, loss, and victory. Robert was a kind man to everyone who knew him. Dependable, calm man whose life focused on his family and job, although behind his well-known grin, there was a sinister secret that would ultimately result in his premature, cruel death that started out innocently enough. When 22-year-old Alina Robert, Alina the niece, relocated to Brooklyn, Amira's late sister's daughter had, I always felt disconnected from my family. One location to another as she looked for a new beginning following a difficult history. When Amira and Robert gave her a location to, Alina happily agreed to remain, expecting to reconstruct her life in front of the. Robert embraced the only relative she had left, welcoming her as though she were, at least that's how it seemed, daughter. As the months passed, people started to identifying minor alterations in Robert, the diligent somebody who once devoted his home nights now appeared restless a lot, seen driving or going for late-night hikes. Alone, his thoughts seemed to be absorbed in. He started working on his reflections, vanishing during lunchtime, loitering in his vehicle, and spoke with someone over the phone with such vigor that rumors that bordered on obsession began to flow, but none could have predicted. The bond between Robert and Alina deepened, uncomfortably near, crossing invisible limits that they were both aware may. What started out innocently can never be undone. Talks and consoling remarks changed into a more sinister. Robert were attracted to Alina's young vitality, her susceptibility, and her desperation. Alina then saw the necessity for connection. Robert, as a man who was a source of stability, who appeared to understand her and provide the consideration and care she had received, progressively starved during her entire life under the shadow of darkness, and in secret, they let their relationship to deteriorate in order to meet a requirement that neither could publicly admit. The Robert and Alina's relationship. Robert soon developed an obsession. Normally quiet and reserved, he was now afflicted with possessiveness and jealousy, always worried that someone might learn the key of his devotion to his wife of almost 30 years. Amira vanished and was replaced with an unquenchable must be near Alina. He would sneak out late at night to sending her cryptic texts to arrange secret meetings out of the public eye. Alina's pals were as few as saw that she had changed from being bashful to, and she started playing sports after being drawn costly jewels and brand new clothing as presents from Robert, who could hardly rely on his little mechanic wage, so she often vanished for hours at a time. There are days when people make weak justifications. It seems to bring up more queries than. They said that her housemates were suspicious of her unpredictable behavior, becomes more and more worried, but Alina dismissed them, keeping her identity a secret. Eventually, Amira became aware of the increasing disagreement between her and Robert. Their union, as a sign of solidarity and hollow Robert, now pervaded the neighborhood, hardly gave her a glance. Distance takes the place of attachment. Disregard for his late-night excursion became the subject of never-ending disputes. The closeness they used to have appeared. Amira attempted, like a faraway recollection, anything to get to him, fighting and begging, accusing him even of having an affair. Yet each time she brought up the topic, Robert would manage to divert, putting the blame on his work, stress, or anything else that could reroute her suspicions. However, Amira knew Robert and wasn't a fool. Superior above everyone other, and the frigid twisted, the sensation in her stomach only intensified with each day, determined to discover solutions. She started following him around, looking over his texts and analyzing. Every conversation he had was brief. Prior to discovering a message thread that chilled her to the bone, an exchange of flirtatious messages with sentiments of desire that showed she had never seen this side of Robert before. However, the name was what most appalled her. On the display, Alina Amira detected the floor dropping from underneath her. How the guy she cherished, the guy she had established a life with, treacherously used her own niece to, grappled with fear and incredulity, fervently wishing to face Robert, yet fearing the responses she was certain he couldn't refute Amira's discovery, reliving the past while pacing her home, recollections that questioned each and every kiss, each and everything he said. She was spinning and not being able to comprehend how the man she was in love with may discard all of their possessions for such a hideous, Amira's illicit affair. When she eventually challenged Robert, and his response was even more terrifying than the actual affair. His face became pale, and his eyes widened in surprise. However, he just issued an apology and no denial. His expression was twisted between quiet and defiance and shame, as though her rage was the trouble rather than his treachery. He acknowledged all of the ways he had been pulled to Alina, how he was unable to control, how he believed she would never learn about it. Was a disclosure that caused Amira a wound in the heart that will never go away. Amira's anger was uncontrollable at one point. The amiable wife was changed by the betrayal into an individual motivated by disgust and retaliation upon realizing that Robert had been moving stealthily. The same young people with their own needs, ladies she had adopted out of affection. She couldn't handle the kindness. She sensed her family's soul break, tarnished by a shadow that would torment her indefinitely. Yet underneath her suffering, something even more sinister was lying there. Smoldering rage that required vengeance. Amira's rage was all eating up a flaming inferno that nobody possibly put out the fire she seen Robert using, an increasing intensity in each of her thoughts, obscured by the harsh truth of his treachery. But when she started organizing her retaliation, an unforeseen calamity would alter anything. In the days following her, Robert was discovered dead in a vehicle accident that initially seemed to such as a terrible accident. His vehicle had veered off the road and struck a tree in what seemed like a deadly but not a noteworthy crash. But for Amira it wasn't enough. She wanted justice out of rage, reconciliation, and recognition that the mishap had taken from her when she was in mourning. She couldn't get rid of the sensation that something more sinister enticed Robert's death, maybe a planned event, even by the same treacherous niece. If Alina had contributed in any way to his passing, guaranteeing her personal security while getting rid of a partner that she could, Amira's doubts have never grown. Desire for retribution turning into an fixation that will ultimately drive her, Amira, to the brink of her sorrow and fury, determined that if the passing of her husband was genuinely no accident, Alina would have to deal with the repercussions in one form or another. She was committed to finding the truth. And there are no police records of family. She would be subject to pleadings or even the law. In the same manner as the Robert investigation, a web of secrets is deepened by Jenkins' passing. Betrayal in a state of raw, devouring rage breaks down. Prior to the close-knit group that formerly held the Robert family in high regard, investigators are becoming more and more suspicious of Robert's vehicle collision. Perhaps it wasn't even an accident, initiating a series of actions that will disclose troubling secret motivations, connections, and a spiral toward insanity. For those who are left behind by the questionable, it becomes more apparent what caused Robert's death. As investigators examine the area, they detect minute indications of altered breakage and little indications on the way that Robert could have had trouble gaining control prior to his vehicle crashing off the investigators on a highway and into a tree. Choose to investigate further, looking at each aspect of his life and connections to recognize who could have desired him. Why Robert's wife Amira is deceased, barely managing to keep herself together. News of His liaison with Alina, his niece, has tore her apart, leaving her confined in vicious circle of incredulity, rage, and desperation. She steers clear of the pathetic gazes of her neighbors who silently chat behind her. Speculation concerning the family's dark secrets and the actual circumstances surrounding Robert. In spite of the suffering, Amira discovers one thought overwhelmed her: Alina being confronted and forced to pay for the betrayal that broke her heart. World, as she grows increasingly suspicious of, begins to think that Alina could have contributed to Robert's demise. Darkening obsession pushes her to hazardous locations in her head where her sole source of solace is vengeance. To control her anger, Alina is cornered during Robert's funeral. Phrases that are icy and poisonous that you believe you. She hisses, "Can you just show your face here?" With a tone full of disdain, Alina, scared, and tries to stay away from Amira. Observe, but Amira's passion doesn't give in. Aunt Amira, I never wanted this. I had no idea how things would turn out. Alina's voice cracks as she stammers. However, her remarks simply made Amira more irate. To the attempt at regret made by Amira, Alina considers hollow twisted to be a horrible effort to release oneself from responsibility while standing. Amira's thoughts are on Robert's grave. Absorbed in contemplation on Robert's treachery and the immorality of his romance she envisions with Alina. They both laugh together. Behind her, making fun of her while revealing secrets, returning the embarrassment of being deceived, losing the guy she loved and experiencing heartbreak, and the scandal's displeasure echo through her, causing her to travel to once serene, she now has a fever pitch of rage. Attitude changes to a chilly, scary. She whispers to Alina, "I'll make a decision. I'm sure everyone is aware of who you are. Be careful to reimburse me for the harm you caused to my." Alina's family was clearly shaken. Swiftly departs the funeral. Amira was furious, feeling resentful of triumph, but her rage just makes her feel worse. Thoughts become more gloomy, unsettling as the days pass. She starts to isolate oneself, further descending into a deranged fixation on taking revenge. Following Robert's burial, the days are agonizing for Alina, who struggles with the burden of her passing, and Robert's part in the affair that she feels confined to. The remembrance of her own mistakes haunts her. Of the forbidden in Robert's touch relationship they had, she starts to experience extreme paranoia and remorse, worrying that everyone would be able to see through, that each look and whisper is aimed at her previously promising future, is eclipsed by an increasing sense of fear. She feels stuck and unable to get out of the poisonous legacy of her coping mechanisms. Alina starts drinking too much, use medicines that cause you to spiral into a state of almost continuous drunkenness. She feels pursued by hearing Amira's menacing remarks. Aunt's irate charges reverberated throughout her mind, stoking her misery and shame. She even considers leaving Brooklyn, dreaming of a fresh start. Her story is unknown someplace, yet she always packs things in her suitcases, draws her back with an unseen chain that keeps her bound to the specter of her past. Days go by, and Alina's mental condition declines. She begins to see Robert in his face twisted in anger as she dreamed. His remarks were twisted with disapproval, and she grows to believe that Amira is observing her, waiting to follow her. When strike paranoia sets in, she feels confined as if her existence were. She can't wake up from the nightmare. In the meanwhile, Amira's fixation on Alina spends hours hurting herself, poring over Robert's every night, assembling notes and messages, each and every aspect of their illegal affair. Revelations are like a knife to the heart, yet she is unable to separate herself. She becomes darker the more she knows. Amira's ideas turn into her reality, moving away from sanity and losing the capacity to differentiate between justice and retaliation, between rationality and insanity. Amira starts formulating a scheme to destroy. Alina is certain that revealing her relationship with Robert to the neighborhood, the government, is the only method to attain true justice, but her strategy requires, on its own sinister journey, propelled by her desire for dominance and vengeance. Alina's mind isn't limited to young people. A lady who cheated on her spouse. She represents everything that is wrong with Robert's life is the perfect example of each treachery, and all of her heartbreaks ever experienced. Her obsession quickly develops into Amira starts making risky, calling Alina with threats whispering in the middle of the night. The words of her voice was twisted with rage as she demanded revenge. Wanders about the city after Alina, in the shadows, observing her every action. She enjoys the terror she perceives in her Amira's niece's eyes. In her twisted state, takes solace in Alina's sense of terror, a somber sense of fulfillment each time she sees. Alina leaps at shadows as he looks over her shoulder, as if anticipating Amira's one evening. Be prepared to strike. Amira finds an entry on Robert's last eerie message on an outdated phone to Alina wrote only a few hours before to his. Robert raises questions about death in it, about their future together, implying the potential for things to end. He expresses to Alina his concern that Amira could understand them and that he's beginning to regret their course of action. Amira repeatedly reads the message to her, emotions changing from astonishment to rage. The last piece of evidence is the message. She has to mentally affirm that Alina used her to control Robert, using her youth and attractiveness to lure him in. She makes herself believe that Alina isn't merely a niece who violated her confidence, but a malevolent power that planned Robert being lured to his doom by the entire affair. This discovery turns into a turning point, strengthening Amira's determination that she will not allow Alina to go away unharmed. She will ensure that the young lady is feeling all of the suffering and sorrow that she has persevered, and she experiences restless nights, formulating a strategy that her mind was racing with, her heart hardened to the gloomy ideas. The outer world is the point of no return, fades, and she is the only thing left. Intense want for retribution, Amira's hatred grows till it consumes everything. A malevolent power that has seized her life. She starts contacting her. A small group of pals are quietly planting hints of mistrust, and rumors are being disseminated regarding the scandal damaging Alina's. She is aware that she is damaging her reputation, Alina's existence, but the contentment of seeing her niece's world fall apart is. She starts to fantasize about the addicting last encounter, picturing Alina's face contorted in regret and terror, pleading forgiveness will never be granted. Amira sees Alina at night in local pub, slouched over a table in intoxicated stupor. Amira observes from seeing the spectacle from a distance and experiencing triumphant surge as she observes the toll. Alina has become the target of her vengeance. The young woman is a shadow of who she used to be, dejected and self-broken, and Amira can't resist taking pleasure in the devastation. She has created a gloomy time. Amira whispers to herself with happiness. Even though it's almost done, she's enjoying her retaliation. She questions whether it never be sufficient if Alina's suffering has the power to genuinely mend the wound by Robert's treachery, or whether the shadows will take up all of Amira's thoughts. Has descended so far into vengeance that she hardly recalls her previous existence. Her whole life has been betrayed, filled with animosity for Alina and a fervent wish to guarantee her nieces completely destroy Amira's efforts to cause harm. From slanderous whispers, Alina, savage late-night phone conversations have gradually permeated her day-to-day existence, damaging her ties with her relatives. Friends ignore her, further isolating her. Rumors circulate among neighbors that she's lost it, and her family has also distanced itself. Recognizing the deep darkness that surrounded her, her loneliness just makes her more insane. as her final remnants of humanity go. Amid the enormous wave of resentment, Alicia, in the meantime, lives in Amira's shadow of perpetual terror. She has been broken by deliberate torture mentality, causing her to suffer from paranoia. With hopelessness, she lies in bed, plagued by Robert's dreams about Amira, hiding in the background of the ever-present fear, punishment, each time she attempts to move forward the savage recollections of her from Amira. She returns to the agony of her sins. Her decisions, she starts to hope for him, stop her pain, but she still feels stuck and confined to the life she can't. Amira determines the longer bear one night. The moment for a last confrontation has arrived. She can't stand to see Alina anymore, living with the knowledge that she contributed to Robert's passing and tarnished their lives together. Fueled by a perverted feeling and constructed together, Amira buys a bottle of justice. Her mentality and prescription sleep aids. On performing the last act of Amira, retaliation was a cold, premeditated move. Draws Alina to her residence beneath under the pretense of reconciliation, her voice over the phone is almost eerily quiet. Amira informs Alina that she is forgiving, simply wishes to discuss stuff, make peace at last, and Alina, caution, down by the persistent pestering from Amira, chooses to accept the offer she finds. Late in the evening, cautious at Amira's house, yet optimistic that perhaps they can come to a consensus, Amira greets her with a calm face. They settle down and offer a cup of tea. Alina takes a sip in the darkened living room. From her cup, without realizing Amira gave her drink a dangerously high spike. Amira watches as she takes a dosage of sleeping medication. Alina's eyes become heavy as she moves. Slow, and a malevolent sense of fulfillment fills her at seeing the young lady slipping into unconsciousness as Alina falls into a slump. It's a ringing phone over Amira's investigator who has been looking into Robert's mishap and has contacted. Tell her that they have discovered Alina's scary new evidence. There were fingerprints discovered on the brakes of her SMS messages and Robert's vehicle. Disclose a complex, compulsive connection, tense with jealousy, manipulation. The investigator informs Amira, which they now think Alina might have deliberately damaged Robert's vehicle in a last-ditch effort to make him her own. Amira. Everything changes as she listens to her fury for a time before letting go. She experienced an all-consuming shock, intended to make Alina suffer in order to pay for shattering her life. But now that she knows that Alina could indeed be the one who led to Robert's demise, her longing for vengeance turns into a lot of darker. She understands that murdering Alina may not be sufficient for Saw to meet them. She longs for justice and wants Alina to endure the repercussions in plain view of the globe, to endure public humiliation before to her death, abruptly overtaken by a fresh scheme. Amira pretends to be in panic and dials 911 as she claims that her niece has abused drugs and, while unconscious at home, she offers believable performance. Her voice was full of, with a phony sense of urgency and dread, and within minutes before paramedics show up, rush. Amira watches as Alina goes to the hospital. With Alina's limp and a hollow smile, corpse is removed with the knowledge that a final act has been initiated by activities of vengeance much more destructive than just passing away at the hospital. Physicians are capable of stabilizing Alina and preventing her death. However, her recuperation has not been pleasant. Detectives are standing by when she wakes up, her bedside, and they start right away, asking her about Robert's mishap. Alina, looking dazed and confused, denies any misconduct, but the foremounting is detected. Evidence and persistent inquiry finally exhaust her, understanding that the reality of what she did may. Alina finally loses it. Acknowledging her involvement in the unfortunate, she had in fact interfered with the accident. Robert's vehicle, in the hopes that he could enough pain to remain with her, never thinking about the likelihood that what she did would result in to his demise as her admission dawns on him. Alina understands Amira's strategic. She's been caught in a trap by revenge, from which she is unable to escape, accused of homicide, and whenever the community becomes hostile, her whole circle of friends, relatives, and even she is seen with disdain by strangers. Disdain, calling her a lifelong killer. Once promising, now irreparably damaged, and she receives a 15-year term in jail for what she did with her life. Reputation completely destroyed for a brief instant in which Amira senses revenge's joy as she observes Alina's punishment seems bleak. Feeling of closure, but as time passes, Amira discovers she is plagued with the wind has a peculiar sense of emptiness. Empty, the once burning vengeance so brightly now, with just ashes remaining in it. Upon awakening, she discovers too late that the desire for vengeance has not only took over Alina's life, but also her own. The ensuing weeks are jam-packed with regret, with Amira gradually disintegrating as she feels the consequences of her deeds, bears the burden of the community that previously respected her, but now sees her with mistrust as whispers about her involvement in. Friends and family learned of Alina's overdose. Family members remove themselves out of disgust at Amira, and the darkness she has embraced becomes a misfit who is haunted by spirits of her last night when she sits. Finally, Amira found herself alone in her empty home. Falls down, giving in to the agony of. She contacts the investigator because of her own guilt, who told her about Alina's participation in Robert's demise and conflict, acknowledges all of her involvement in driving. Alina was on the verge of overdosing, contrived, and the bitter animosity that had overwhelmed her, and she was stricken with regret. Asks for pardon, understanding that in her pursuit of justice, she has emerged as culpable as the people she intended to discipline. Amira faces attempted murder charges and recklessly putting her in jeopardy. Behaviors that hinder Alina's trial becomes a media extravaganza with the community split on her intentions. Her primary duty is convicted and ordered to serve time in jail for the rest of her life. A woman who wanted retribution but suffered the price. Alina must pay her own price for it. Jail term and serving the remaining. Her childhood behind bars tormented her forever. By her involvement in her uncles, their lives were previously intertwined in a sinister and prohibited secret has been broken beyond repair, with each party paying the final cost for the transgressions they dedicated. As both doors close, their life, the community is left battling the terrible reality that story of treachery, retaliation, and the terrible results of a relationship that ought not to have been.